Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this Friday morning. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Alyssa Vine. I'm the University Director of Credit for Prior Learning in CUNY's Office of Academic Affairs. And I have here with me today Myci Atkinson, who is a doctoral student at Teachers College of Columbia University, and we'll hear more about her and her work in just a few minutes. I wanted to just quickly mention, so this is the second in our professional development series for Credit for Prior Learning this year. For anybody that missed our session in September, we did an intro to CPL, which is now recorded and archived on our website if anybody's interested in going back to that. And today's session, we're really fortunate to have Myci with us. If folks can mute, that would be great. So anyways, so we're really lucky to have Myci with us today. About a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, I was contacted by colleagues in CUNY's Office of Applied Research Evaluation and Data Analytics, and they had received an inquiry from the Community College Research Center, which Myci is a part of, letting us know that there was a doctoral student who was really interested in credit for prior learning and interested in doing a mixed methods research project focused on CUNY's CPL data. And this was really great timing for us because about a year before that, so if we connected with Myci, say in early fall of 2024, a year before that in 2023, we had launched our university-wide guidance for how CPL opportunities should be configured in CUNY first. And so we had about a year of data at that point. And this offered a really great opportunity for us to actually have somebody do some analysis of that data. And also, Myci was interested in bringing faculty perspectives into the same research in order to help us both understand more about CUNY's data and also to find out what faculty know and understand and think about CPL at this point. Myci, if you can move to the next slide, please. So as many of you may be aware, CUNY has had a university-wide policy for credit for prior learning in place for about 5 years. It was passed by the Board of Trustees in 2020. I'm just going to very quickly go over a few of the key points of the policy that I think will be really relevant to us in thinking about the data and also about the role of faculty and their perceptions of CPL at CUNY at this point. So as you can see from this, we have the sort of jargony policy language on one side and then some straightforward summary points about just some of the key aspects. So faculty are really the decision makers when it comes to credit for prior learning. They're the ones that determine the alignment of non-collegiate learning experiences, exams, and other forms of CPL, and decide the most appropriate course equivalencies and credit awards. Credit can be awarded for major courses. It can also be awarded to fulfill gen ed requirements or can be awarded as departmental electives. It can be awarded as general elective, but the policy really steers away from that because it's not as beneficial to students in terms of their progress toward degree completion. CPL credits also cannot fulfill residency requirements at CUNY. And when students transfer between CUNY colleges, CPL credits transfer as though the student took the course at the original college and are not subject to reevaluation by the receiving college. They function just like other transfer credits. Myci, if you can go to the next slide, please. Also within CUNY's CPL policy, there are 4 distinct mechanisms for awarding CPL credit. The first is standardized exams, and this is the one that's mandated. All colleges must award credit based on qualifying scores on these 6 exam programs that are listed here. The other forms of CPL, non-collegiate learning, So that's like industry credentials, also military trainings and occupations, different kinds of professional licenses and employer trainings, continuing ed articulation. That all falls within non-collegiate learning. And then departments also have the ability to offer challenge exams, and colleges or departments at either level can offer portfolio assessment. We're going to hear more about the data across all four of these types from Myci in just a moment, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody here had that context of CUNY's policy and what CPL actually encompasses across the university before we dive into her research. If you can go ahead. There. At this point, I would be delighted to introduce Myci Atkinson, who will tell you more about her own research and background, and will really lead this session for the most part, although I will be here throughout to provide various contexts as needed, and also happy to answer any questions along the way. So with that, Myci, please take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being here. I'm just really excited to talk about what I've been working on for the past year or so. Um, just to give you a little bit about me, I'm in my fourth year at Teachers College in the Education Policy PhD program. And I have a lot of experience working on different projects that involve some college no degree grants, non-credit to credit pathways, student support programs specifically for adult learners. And in all of these projects that I've been on, credit for prior learning has been brought up in some way, but there's not like a ton that's known about it. Um, it's very clear that, according to some of the interviews that I've conducted previously, that it is a piece of supporting adult learners. But when you really dig into it, there's only a few organizations that do research on this, notably the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, known as CALE, and ACE, the American Council on Education, which provides the credit recommendations for credit for prior learning. So I was really interested in digging in a little bit more, especially lucky to be a part of doing this at CUNY because CUNY has been working on this, and the timing just, I think, was very perfect that there's been a recent policy development at CUNY and across the institution. So I was super lucky to be connected with Alyssa, and she's just been extremely helpful in providing context around credit for prior learning at CUNY over the past year or so. Um, all right, so let's dig into the research. So I was interested in two main bubbles, I would say. Who receives credit for prior learning and what types? And then what are faculty perceptions of credit for prior learning? We know that faculty have a huge amount of pull in making sure that this policy happens. And it's very important to understand what they think about credit for prior learning and their own experiences with working with credit for prior learning. A lot of the types involve a lot of faculty expertise, so it's important to understand how they're thinking about it if we want this policy to be an opportunity for students. So the goals of the project are to investigate faculty perceptions and policy implementation of CPL, support institutional efforts to build sustainable credit for prior learning practices, and really center on faculty engagement due to their key role in credit for prior learning execution. Um, so the research design, I'm a mixed methods researcher. I really love to both look at quantitative data. So I was able to look at CUNY's administrative data from 2020 to 2025. And I also was able to conduct 11 interviews. I recruited interviewees based on snowball sampling. And I also used the quantitative data to kind of decide what direction I wanted to go in. So for me, I really focus on mixing those methods. I like for them to speak to each other. So while I kind of separate out the findings, these things were happening simultaneously. So first I got to look at the quantitative data to kind of decide who I wanted to speak with. Then after I spoke with people, I was able to go back to the quantitative data and do further analyses based on what they told me. So first, I'll just talk about the quantitative findings. So what's happened since CUNY implemented a CPL policy? Um, this is a great note that non-AP CPL awards have actually more than doubled since academic year 2020 to 2021. So I'm just going to toss it to Alyssa, who can talk a little bit about the context and what was going on at that time.
Thanks. Yeah. So, I think that it's a really interesting point that AP policy at CUNY predates the CPA, the overall CPL policy. And with that in mind, I think that that faculty and academic departments are more accustomed to what AP is and how it functions, and adoption has been pretty widespread across the university. Other forms of CPL have been more incremental since the CPL policy was adopted in 2020, and significantly since we really started collecting data in a consistent manner, which was in 2023. So the trajectory that we've seen non-AP CPL awards double since the policy was adopted, I think really speaks to all the work that has gone on at campuses across the university.
Yeah, it's definitely a good sign. So on that note, I was curious about what types of credit for prior learning are most often awarded at CUNY. So just across the board, 35,763 students were awarded credit for prior learning in the data set overall. There's over 60 types of credit for prior learning offered in the data set, which is a lot of, there's so many different types of credit for prior learning. And advanced placement is the most common, with about 31,000-ish students receiving advanced placement credit for prior learning. So that, uh, from a data perspective, very much overwhelms the data set. And for me, in my interest in adult learners, I wanted to make sure that I focused a little bit more on non-AP credit for prior learning, just because advanced placement tends to be, high school students take an advanced placement course and they take an exam. That exam is awarded as credit for prior learning at colleges, which is a more traditional route. And I'm really focused on adult learners who maybe have more experiential learning credit for prior learning, or more credit for prior learning that helps with their journey as adult learners. So I was more focused on this 5,129 students who receive non-AP credit for prior learning at CUNY. And notably, a large portion of that is the college level examination program, CLEP, which was awarded to nearly 1,500 students. This can often be, I think, a very common form of CLEP is language CLEP, where if a student has spoken a language for a long time, they can take this exam. It's out of pocket about $100 to take this exam. However, there are ways to get that waived, which Alyssa will talk about later. And students can get credit for their knowledge of a language, or there's tons of different types of CLEP. That's just one example, but it's a really accessible way for students to receive credit. And where are students receiving credit for prior learning at high rates? This is not super comprehensive. There are lots of things happening with credit for prior learning at colleges. However, these are ones that I just wanted to highlight. So CUNY School of Professional Studies, for context, is a school that serves students who already have a certain number of credits. So they're returning students. Therefore, CPL is kind of already embedded in SPS, and it has been for a long time. So at this school, 1,600 students receive non-AP credit for prior learning, with 629 of those being via Google certifications. Google has lots of opportunities for credit for prior learning, especially in IT. And then another institution that I wanted to highlight is Hostos. They have very high CLEP rates, but they also hold a challenge exam. An example of this is students who are paraprofessionals who join a teaching program can use the challenge exam to get placed in a higher level course and receive credit for that. And this is beneficial not only for the students who, have an appropriate placement and get to go through the program a little bit faster, but it's also really useful for the school because it's a very experienced cohort of students when you have these opportunities. So it's beneficial on both ends. And another school is Lehman College, who awarded about 1,600 non-AP credit for prior learning to students, and 691 of those are via Coursera. Coursera is a very notable way of receiving credit for prior learning. It is usually online, flexible coursework that students can receive credit for. for some kind of requirement that they have typically. So there's just a lot going on at different institutions with credit for prior learning, and these are just a few that are worth noting. So as far as who is receiving credit for prior learning, what I did was I did an analysis where I examined different student characteristics and their likelihood of receiving credit for prior learning overall. When I looked at just overall credit for prior learning, these were the results. Pell recipients are slightly more likely than non-Pell recipients to receive credit for prior learning when you control for gender and race. Women are more likely than men to receive credit for prior learning when you hold race and Pell status equal. And students of color are slightly less likely to receive credit for prior learning than white students, with the exception of Asian students when controlling for gender and Pell status. However, and this is a very big however, these data are largely reflective of AP credits. So I was more curious, okay, how does this story change when we look at the different types of credit for prior learning? And just for the sake of me not being super repetitive, the story is pretty much the same when it comes to gender and Pell recipients. Across the board, when I looked at different types of credit for prior learning, overall, Pell recipients are slightly more likely than non-Pell recipients to receive credit for prior learning, and women tend to be more likely than men to receive credit for prior learning. Where the story changes is when we look at racial groups. So I dug into this a little bit more, and just when I did even a quick tabulation, when I just took out advanced placement, I found that Black and Hispanic students were actually more likely than white students to receive credit for prior learning. So even just taking out like a quick tabulation, I was seeing that the story does change when you exclude advanced placement from the analysis. So we're seeing that maybe there is something going on with credit for prior learning and equity at CUNY. So I just really quickly separated all of these 60 plus types of credit for prior learning into different groups just to get a sense of uh, what students were receiving as far as the different types of credit for prior learning. So I did industry credentials, standardized exams, military training and occupation, and portfolio assessment. So here, we're already seeing that there is a different story that happens when we look at industry credential credit for prior learning. For the sake of you not having to read all of these numbers, I'll throw in this chart here. Notably, the group that is American Indian and Native Alaskan, I took that group out just because the sample size was so small, it was kind of misrepresented in the graph. But overall, here we see that Black students are more likely than white students to receive credit for prior learning for an industry credential. Very similar story, Hispanic students are also more likely to be awarded an industry credential. And then Asian and white students have a very similar likelihood of receiving credit for prior learning for an industry credential. And once again, the story is the same across the board. Female students are more likely than male students to receive an industry credential, and Pell students are more likely than non-Pell students to receive an industry credential, which is, again, true across the board for all the types of CPL that I've examined. So exam-based CPL, we've already kind of looked at by looking at overall credit for prior learning, since AP credits are so overwhelming in the data set. But just a reminder, students of color, with the exception of Asian students and American Indian Native Alaskan students, are less likely than white students to receive credit for prior learning from an exam. And Asian students are actually more likely than white students to receive exam-based credit for prior learning. Once again, female students and Pell recipients are more likely to receive exam-based credit for prior learning as well. And here's just the graph for this. As you can see, the trends over time. Asian students are the most likely to receive exam-based credit for prior learning. All right, so once I broke it down, I looked at military credit for prior learning and ran into a little bit of trouble as far as parsing out what counts as military credit for prior learning. So rather than throw numbers on a screen that I think are maybe a little bit skewed, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the data collection practices. So the numbers might be a little bit skewed because military transcripts are a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to pass it to Alyssa to talk a little bit about how data collection works with military credit for prior learning.
Yeah, so basically, when joint services transcripts are being evaluated, they can sometimes include industry certifications or standardized exams, which may end up categorized as those types of CPL and not as military. So there's that complicating factor. And then there's also a challenge that's a little bit similar to AP in that colleges have been evaluating joint services transcripts for a long time, predating CUNY's CPL policy. And in some cases, the way that those credits are recorded on student transcripts is not in a way that our current data CPL data tracking accounts for. So we don't really have a full picture at this point. We do have guidance from the university registrar for how colleges should be configuring equivalencies for military trainings and occupations. Which is based on external org IDs for each branch of the military. But at this time, not that many colleges are actively using those. So we are working on sort of improving use of those mechanisms for tracking purposes. And then the other piece of this that remains complicated is that the evaluation of joint services transcripts is a pretty it can be pretty tedious, and for those who aren't very familiar with military, it can be confusing, and no two transcripts are going to look the same. There's so much variability in when and where and in what sort of numeric code different trainings occur on a joint services transcript. So there are things that we're hoping to do that will help us create more consistency in the way that CPL credit is awarded for military. For example, this year we're hoping to identify some military occupational specialties to do multi-campus evaluation and come up with recommendations so that, for example, an Army medic would be eligible for certain CPL credits regardless of which CUNY college they went to, based on an evaluation of faculty or an evaluation by faculty of what specific learning outcomes and competencies are common across different Army medics. So that's an example of the direction that we're hoping to go with some of our work on military CPL that we're hoping will improve both the awarding of meaningful credit for students as opposed to elective credit, and also hopefully help us improve our tracking practices to improve the quality of our data.
Thank you. And portfolio credit for prior learning, this was something that was difficult to analyze based on quantitative data for similar reasons. However, it's really important to note that national data indicates the benefits of portfolio credit for prior learning. It's probably one of the most beneficial types of credit for prior learning. Additionally, my qualitative findings suggest positive benefits at CUNY. In speaking with people who have experience with credit for prior learning, it's an extremely rewarding type of credit for prior learning. Students get to go through a really reflective process, which I will talk a little bit more about later on. But the data is limited despite all of these benefits. And I will just pass it off to Alyssa once again to talk a little bit about that and talk about the working group as well.
Thanks. Yeah. So one reason that portfolio credit isn't as comprehensively represented in our data is that at this time, the university guidance for how CPL equivalencies are configured, it actually doesn't account for portfolio credit. And that's mostly because there's only a couple of colleges that are using portfolio in an organized way. But we're hoping to change that, which I'll say more about in a moment. But so I think that we will have a new iteration of our university-wide guidance that will include guidance for how portfolio credits are captured, which I think will shift the data over time. And then we also are working this year to try and help more colleges adopt portfolio as an opportunity for students. And we are convening an open invitation working group throughout this year that's going to be exploring different topics over the course of a number of different meetings in order to develop university-wide standards and guidance materials, as well as tools that will hopefully make it easier for campuses to adopt the CPL practices that are right for them. If anybody has not heard about this already and is interested in being part of those conversations, I would encourage you to use the QR code on the screen to register your interest through our form. That'll put you on our email list where we're sending our meeting invitations and also other kinds of updates. We really want this process to reflect a wide range of perspectives and voices. So I would really encourage anybody who is interested to please sign up and hopefully join some upcoming sessions.
All right. And calling back to the fact that I was sort of trying to very much mix both the interviews and the way that I analyze these data. Something that came up in interviews was this kind of subgroup of credit for prior learning, which includes CSM Learn, Coursera, Sophia Learning, Straighterline, where it's almost it feels kind of funny to call it credit for prior learning because a lot of the times these uh, online courses are happening simultaneously with when somebody is in a program. But more often colleges use alternative forms of credit to supplement coursework. And we can see that over time, this type of credit for prior learning is increasing at colleges. There's a lot more interest in providing credit for these types of online, very flexible courses. But just to note, I think there's sometimes a little bit of confusion, like, why isn't this a transfer credit? And the reason is accreditation. So things like Coursera, CSM Learn are not associated with like an accredited university. They're kind of their own separate thing. So essentially what we do is we use like ACE recommendations paired with faculty expertise to decide, does CUNY award credit for this type of course, or do we have to do something else? So I'll pass it to Alyssa just to talk about if you have questions of, oh, well, what do I do if a student comes to me and says, can you award me credit for this Coursera course? Um, I'll let Alyssa talk about that.
Yeah, so we have been hearing in my office more and more over the last couple of years about students requesting credit for these forms of courses, and there are colleges that are actively evaluating individual courses upon request by students, or as they're hearing from more and more students about it, and the outcomes of those evaluations vary. In some cases, they lead to a CPL equivalency, and in other cases, faculty aren't sure that there really is a match for it, and that's exactly the right process. Is for academic departments to evaluate these as they would other forms of CPL. As Myci mentioned, I think that in some cases, some of these providers, their marketing leads students to believe that that they will be eligible for credit at a college or university, and the students show up expecting to get credit, and that can be a tricky situation. So our office issued a memo a couple of months ago with guidance for college that essentially says that these should be treated as CPL credit and evaluated as such. I also, two other things I want to mention. One is that if, as in a faculty role or in a CPL office role, if you are looking for more information by which to evaluate these courses, please feel free to be in touch with the CPL lead at your campus or contact me in my office. Because we do have contacts at these organizations that can, in some cases, provide more in-depth curriculum materials and information on how assessments work, which can be more useful in some cases than a straight ACE recommendation where you don't necessarily really understand the content or the learning outcomes of the course. So please feel free to reach out with questions about that. And also, we do recognize that these evaluations can take time. So the answer to a student in the moment may be, no, we don't award credit for this. And that's where I think that CLEP exams can come in handy because that is a form of CPL that all colleges must award credit for qualifying scores. So if there's a student that spent their time and money taking this course and then they are thinking that they were going to get credit and now they're finding out that they may not, or not right now, letting them know that a CLEP exam in the same discipline and topic area may be a way for them to demonstrate the learning from that course. And also there's an organization called Modern States that provides free test prep for CLEP exams. And upon completion of those test prep sessions, students can actually receive vouchers for CLEP exams, which would relieve the financial burden of taking the CLEP exam for somebody who may have already spent their time and money on another type of course. So just putting those out there as ways of sort of handling inquiries from students about this, and very happy to help anybody who is trying to figure out the right approach for evaluating these learning experiences.
Yeah, and just noting that this seems to be something that's on the up. So I plan on in my future research continuing to just dig into what's going on with these kind of alternative pathways, and especially as CUNY probably more and more so will start to accept more of these courses as credit over time. Yeah, so now we'll shift to qualitative findings. Just a couple notes on the qualitative interviews. I conducted 11 interviews. This is, a small pilot study that I hope to expand on as dissertation starts to happen for me. And I use snowball recruitment, meaning, Alyssa connected me with some people who then connected me with other people. And I focused on people who have experienced implementing CPL. So this is a biased sample, quite frankly. This is not people who either don't know anything about CPL or are super opposed to CPL. It's people who have already invested some time into implementing this policy at some level. And the participants were in 5 fields across 5 institutions. Not only were the fields very diverse, but also the types of CPL that they have experience in was extremely diverse as well. I really lucked out because I got to speak to people who worked with portfolio assessment, industry credentials, exams, alternative forms of credit. So I was very lucky to have a little bit of insight across all of these different types and different fields when it comes to CPL. So very grateful for all the participants who were willing to take their time to talk to me. So let's just dig into the findings. A lot of faculty feel that CPL is really helpful in supporting diverse learners. The beauty of credit for prior learning is that there are so many different types and so many different ways to show knowledge and skills. So this particular faculty member said, it's a great opportunity to present learning activities in multiple ways. It gives students choice. I think the variety of credit for prior learning opportunities that we have a little bit of everything to be able to give students choice. So rather than just students sitting in a traditional classroom, this gives students who maybe don't like that learning style an opportunity to show their knowledge in a different way. Similarly, CPL is supporting a changing demographic. Generally, participants brought up how credit for prior learning can be a tool in supporting a changing demographic of students in higher education, particularly with the timing of the CUNY policy. So this participant talked about when the pandemic struck, it became very important during that time because not only were we working with near completers, we were also working with students amidst a lot of uncertainty. CPL initiatives helped students earn some credits while they were trying to figure things out in their lives and in this world in a self-paced environment. So the timing was very helpful for colleges, and this is one way to keep students engaged in a time where maybe their main focus is not school. So it was just one tool that helped students stay in their programs and focused on their education during a really stressful time. But we also know that, since the pandemic, there's been a lot of shifts in student demographics. I mean, especially at CUNY, there's a lot of students who are balancing a lot of different things. So even though that was true of the pandemic, it still remains true to this time as well. Additionally, one faculty member
Calling for chat for.
Sorry. Additionally, one faculty member specifically talked a lot about portfolio assessment. This faculty member had a lot of experience hands-on with awarding credit for portfolio assessment, and I thought that this was a really impactful quote. The portfolios I get, I'm so blown away. It's definitely more of a reflective exercise because they have to look at each learning outcome individually and then back it up with things they've done in the past, with certifications, with an experience, with a specific recollection of something that they did, a project or whatever. So it really is a deep dive into their past. And I think it's rewarding for our students to write the portfolios because a lot of the times when our students get to us, depending on where they're coming from, they're almost like, I really want to get this degree and I failed multiple times. And when they do CPL and write a portfolio or take a certification, I think it gives them confidence. Notably, there's also a small study out there that interviewed students who got credit for prior learning, and this very much aligns with the findings of that study, that students who receive credit for prior learning do get a boost of confidence. They feel more belonging at an educational space. So this, especially portfolio assessment, I think is a really interesting type of credit for prior learning. At this particular institution, the portfolio assessment is in the form of a course. So essentially a student signs up for this portfolio course and then gets to basically argue their way for evidence of why they understand these learning outcomes. So it's a very reflective and rewarding opportunity for students, according to faculty. Additionally, faculty believe that CPL can be a way of boosting equity. It might solve some issues that hinder student retention and completion. So this faculty member says, in a situation where a student wants to graduate at a specific time, instead of, jamming her up and saying, no, you have to wait until fall, saying, go take this certification exam, see if you can do it. And if you can do it, then you'll graduate in summer and on time. So it's a great opportunity for students who are in a bind. Maybe something happened with their transcripts and they thought they were going to graduate on time, and then it ends up they need just one more credit. Credit for prior learning is a good opportunity for students to have a little bit more flexibility and hit their academic goals on time. Faculty also says, so there's kind of a boundary in place. It's not just like, hey, complete all 120 credits. Yeah, and then we just sign off on your degree. That would kind of be like a degree mill in a way, but I do think it offers students an opportunity, especially those who are struggling financially. I think sometimes people learn in different ways, especially adults. To say that the only way that somebody can learn something is through taking a course, that doesn't sit right with me. I think that somebody can demonstrate knowledge through an exam or by completing a Coursera course and then completing the certification and demonstrate knowledge in a different way. So I think it offers opportunities for increased equity in that area as well. Um, there are also some faculty interests versus institutional interests. So here we're getting into more of like the tensions as far as some of the things that faculty had either questions about. Um, this one faculty member specifically mentioned that they prefer CPL to be framed as a mechanism to address learning gaps in their classrooms and in their fields rather than shorter time to degree. And this faculty member mainly talked about, well, my day-to-day, I'm focused on my interest in my field and my interest in students learning. So this faculty member says they talk about retention or, shorter time and money for degree, but I don't think it matters like they think it matters to faculty. I don't think they understand what we are very interested in, the things happening in our own field. And then CPL happens to be a good vehicle to address a gap between student knowledge and what we teach. So this faculty member just thinks that framing around CPL could also be about the benefits of CPL to an actual classroom space as well, and not just about shorter time to degree. So there are also tensions in beliefs. According to multiple participants, there's dissonance among faculty regarding the purpose of higher education very broadly, which they believe impacts the implementation of CPL. So this faculty member says some professors are very aligned with the industry and some are thinking too academic. So there's a bit of a tension between, traditional education versus education focused on workforce. And another faculty member says that this is a conversation worth having probably more than it's currently happening. So just this is a very broad issue across faculty perceptions of what exactly is the purpose of higher education, and therefore what is the role of credit for prior learning in this broader scope of higher education. This one's a really specific tension, but it's worth noting that credit for prior learning cannot alone raise a student's GPA if they're struggling academically and need to improve their grades. So this was one very specific circumstance that a faculty member spoke about, which was a dismissed student. So this student needed about, you know, 0.02 points more GPA in order to not be dismissed. And this faculty member said, yeah, it was like basically disappointing that a certification can't be used to raise your GPA. It just wasn't, CPL is not good for that purpose. It won't lower your GPA, but it's not going to raise your GPA to receive this certification that this specific faculty member was looking at. So it's just worth noting that that's not the purpose of credit for prior learning. That's one thing that it probably can't do for students unless they might have to look at other options to raise their GPA. There's also some mixed feelings on the role of centralization. It's kind of the conundrum of credit for prior learning is that part of the beauty of it is that it's flexible and maybe there are so many different types, but it's also very challenging and it requires some faculty work in implementing it. So while resources such as ACE and CALE offer helpful structure, some faculty believe CPL implementation can be a little bit complicated, which is a heavy cognitive lift for faculty and department chairs. Faculty also value case-by-case individualism of CPL implementation. So it's kind of, they like both. They want structure, but they also like that they have a lot of say in how credit for prior learning can be implemented because they can use their expertise to make it happen. So there's not one model that's a perfect fit. The industry certifications are a really good example. I went into that feeling like, oh, there's an ACE credit recommendation for some of these that should make this very straightforward. But then it turns out those credit recommendations, when you dive into them even a little bit more deeply, you realize that they're based on a particular organization's preparation training for that credential, which is not necessarily applicable to a specific program. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit complicated because it's almost good that it's individualized to faculty, but it's also challenging to implement. Faculty are interested in the impacts of credit for prior learning, and as we know, there's not a ton of research on the impacts of credit for prior learning, particularly at CUNY. So given that faculty play a major role in CPL implementation, some faculty feel that a better understanding of the impacts of credit for prior learning would be motivating. This is a cyclical challenge in implementation. So one faculty member said, how much investment do we need to put into this versus the benefit? 4% of the students basically ended up doing an industry credential, and then they come and they want to take a credit. That's different than if it's 10% or if it's 20%. The amount of investment in time and faculty resources and so on has to be balanced with what the percentage are we talking about so far. So this is really challenging, right? Because on one hand, faculty would really like to see like are students actually receiving credit for prior learning if I go through all of this to make it happen. But then at the same time, we can't get those numbers without faculty investment in CPL. So it's a chicken and egg conundrum where we need this to happen before we see the numbers. However, it would be really nice to have the numbers to convince, to make a convincing argument for why it's worth the time to do all this. So it's a challenge. So based off of that, just overall, I would just say interviews more broadly, all the faculty members that I spoke to are excited for the future of credit for prior learning. They see a lot of positive benefits based on their own experiences. There are definitely challenges in implementing credit for prior learning, and I appreciated faculty's full honesty on some of the things that they were worried about. So based off of that, I tried to come up with recommendations. Quite frankly, it's a lot of continue to do these things that CUNY's already working on. But just in general, building faculty support, centering classroom learning experience might benefit like some of those faculty members who are maybe less invested in shorter time to degree, but are more focused on, okay, well, how does that help my field? there are really good anecdotes of even just in the interviews that I've talked to people about, where there are anecdotes where having credit for prior learning has made a cohort more experienced and has actually helped their classroom experience and helped them think about, okay, what do students actually come in knowing and how do I adjust my classroom based off of that? So there's a lot of anecdotes that I think would be positive in framing credit for prior learning, maybe for those faculty who are not as interested in shorter time to separate. And I also think that what was brought up from faculty is providing spaces for discussion, especially on these broader tensions of what is the purpose of credit for prior learning in a specific space and in a specific field. Continuing to collect and share data as evidence of CPL implementation and eventually impacts. That's a continuing effort at CUNY, and I think that there's been some really helpful information about what data is maybe less clear on credit for prior learning and how to improve that over time. And there's a lot of work being done around that currently. And just some implementation recommendations. There's a lot of infrastructure that's being worked on currently. So CUNY's Transfer Explorer tool, using that as a way to a student-facing way to understand credit for prior learning, and continuing to use ACE guidance as it feels fit. There's a lot of faculty expertise that's needed in continuing to build infrastructure around credit for prior learning. Alternative forms of credit for prior learning are something that faculty have interest in. A few faculty members notably said that graduate schools could use more forms of credit for prior learning. There could be more online coursework, higher level placement for retroactive credit for prior learning. So that's a specific type of credit for prior learning where, say, a faculty member knows that a student has a lot of experience in, for example, language. They would be able to place the student in a higher level course. So say Spanish level 3 instead of just putting them in the intro class. And if they pass that Spanish level 3, awarding credit retroactively for those other forms of, or for those other courses. So that's one form of credit for prior learning that is less talked about, but it's something that some faculty have interest in. Institutional collaboration, notably, it is difficult to decide what should be awarded credit. So using each other, I think, as a way to understand, oh, I think that this is a really good form of credit for prior learning that we've implemented over here at this institution, and sharing that with other institutions. That collaboration is key to making it easier for everybody to implement credit for prior learning. Another thing that was brought up in interviews is mentorships to understand student experience, and that also helps with understanding the gaps in knowledge for students. And just again, data collection, refinement, clarity on capturing credit for prior learning so that we can provide faculty members with the information about how this is working and how this is being implemented, and eventually the impacts of credit for prior learning, which again has been worked on and is currently being worked on at CUNY. So we have about 10 minutes left, but in conclusion, overall, there is a ton of enthusiasm for the future of credit for prior learning. It encourages diverse learners, it fosters more experienced classrooms, and it engages students in their field. CUNY can continue to expand credit for prior learning opportunities through consistent data collection, continued implementation support, and integrating credit for prior learning in institutional culture. And I think that one of the nice things about credit for prior learning is that institutions do have an opportunity to take it and make it what they need for their students. And just in general, more research is needed. So on that note, I do plan on continuing research on credit for prior learning as I'm working on my dissertation proposal. So I was hoping to have a shameless plug. Alyssa has a poll for anybody who has further questions or would be interested in seeing research that explores specific routes. I am currently in the midst of planning more research, so I wanted to offer a space for folks to just write out if they have any interest in suggesting further research. I would be more than open. So Alyssa, I don't know if you have oh yeah, here we go. So you should see a poll This is just so that I can collect a little bit more of further questions about credit for prior learning at CUNY and what would you like to see explored in future CPL research or discussion. So your poll is there. If you have any suggestions for me, I would be more than happy to dig in if it feels feasible for myself. So, and thank you so much for being here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Myci. Yeah, so we'll leave the poll up for a few minutes. So if people want to input, and we'll send it out afterward as well. I see that we have a hand up. Zulema, if you want to go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for this presentation. Zulema Blair, Dean of the School of Business at Medgar College. So I just wanted to comment and offer a suggestion. And remember you said it's difficult to get, I don't know if difficult is the right word, faculty on board and buy-in in the process. But I would think if you provide data, I know you're collecting data, but if you show them how it has benefited their majors, the number, let's use business administration or public administration, you can demonstrate, oh, these numbers of students who worked in government placed a portfolio and, show the outcome of how they, graduated or accelerated their graduation, accelerated their confidence. And also I'm going to put this in the question that you provided, are we going to provide support to student support services like the Writing Center that would assist individuals in helping them to write their portfolio, or maybe have someone, a grad assistant, help with that? I'm not sure how you would do it or the types of resources that CUNY could provide, but I think that could help. If I'm a faculty member and I know that support services are being offered to help, and I could work with the Writing Center or Learning Center, et cetera, that would help me better assist.
Yeah, Myci, do you mind if I jump in to respond there? No, those are great points. I think that we're at a stage of our data collection and analysis where we're getting further along and closer to being able to provide data that that helps shape that understanding of the benefits for students, for institutions, for departments. So totally appreciate the suggestion and think that that is a direction that that we're actively moving in. I will say this isn't quite what you were getting toward, but I'll mention that I'll put this link in the chat. Our next professional development session in November is going to focus on giving colleges more data and more ways of using that data to really understand existing CPL opportunities at other CUNY colleges and how those, like based on transfer rules, how they could move toward evaluating more learning experiences and implementing those at their campuses. So I think that we're doing a lot of groundwork to hopefully make that data very accessible for departments to use for discussion purposes and implementation purposes. So that's coming very soon, and we're really excited to work on that. And I think that your points about making sure that writing centers are equipped to support students who are pursuing CPL opportunities is really well taken. I think that's the kind of idea that we really want to flesh out through the work of our portfolio working group to understand what types of professional development or resources colleges would need in order to leverage those kinds of existing student support services on campus. So thank you so much for your comments there.
Thank you.
Parisa, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Thank you so much for the great presentation. I have one question related to the exam. You mentioned some group of the Asian will earn more credit through the exam compared to the other groups. And I was wondering, did you look at the attempt to take the exam? So the reason I'm asking the question, some students, I noticed they don't have self-confidence to take the exam, but culturally, Asians are really good exam takers. So that was the one question I wanted to ask. And the the second one was, did you look at the different learners, such as having a dyslexia or ADHD, and look at the different outcomes in these groups?
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, I really like that idea about looking at different learners. I did not have that data, but I do intend to look further on some of these things. The idea about attempts is actually one of the ideas that I have for my dissertation, which would examine I would basically want to look at the outcomes of people who just barely like failed one of these exams and students who just barely passed and compare outcomes for each group. So hopefully I will have more information on attempts at these exams and whether or not students pass. And then culturally, that actually did come up in my interviews about the confidence in taking exams. That's why it came up that when students, especially students who speak specific languages, some of them are too scared to take the CLEP exam, which is why that faculty placement sometimes helps students who are too scared to take an exam. That flexibility that Credit for Prior Learning provides, some institutions allows to kind of pass through that and just support students who maybe are not as confident about taking exams culturally. Yeah, so that did come up, but yeah, that's a really interesting point. I'll definitely see what kind of data I can get later on to answer
So
this.
much.
Sam, you want to jump in?
Sure. A lot of different things to comment on. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I put some of it in the poll, but basically, one thing that comes to mind for me is in terms of just future research questions for this project is one is the balance of different CPL in the sense of if you look at Hostos, I'm from Hostos Community College. Our data, we have a lot of challenge exams and a fair amount of credit articulation agreements with our continuing education programs. But because we have an allied health department that's a large part of our student population, there's not any credit for prior learning in that. So I think an interesting question is sort of where these credit is being granted areas in terms of academic disciplines. The other thing I was going to mention is age of the student. I would imagine that, again, the AP students are all fresh out of high school, but I would say that many of the other CPL recipients that I interact with are adult learners. Some of them are much older, especially if they're doing like a portfolio or a challenge exam. They're older students. So there is a divide there, I think, between different groups that not just about race or gender, but also age. And then the other thing that I was going to mention is that there are students that get CPL for multiple methods.
Yes.
And so that, that's is something to think about. Are there students that kind of take advantage of it twice or three times? Maybe they get their AP credit, but then they also take a CLEP exam and then they also do a certificate, and it's like they're actually kind of cashing in multiple times to help their college career. What could we learn from those particular students who really seem to be taking advantage of it? And then the last thing I'll mention here is I think it might be useful to get the perspective of academic advisors as well, because they are advising students. Particularly, you mentioned the case of like students nearing graduation. They might be advising students looking at their degree plan and saying, hey, all you need is 3 credits. Like, why not just take a CLEP exam, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it would be interesting to get, a few academic advisors' perspectives on CPL and how they see it influencing the trajectory of college students.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, that's actually the multiple forms of CPL was a huge challenge. When I was looking at the data, I had to create like 2 separate data sets. One that's just student level, another that's like students who received multiple forms. So yeah, so I do plan on continuing to look at that. It is challenging as far as data cleaning, but it's in the works. Yeah.
That's Great. So we're at time. I see that we have a hand up. Myci, it's up to you if you want to take one more question, but I do want to say for anybody that is that's jumping off, thank you so much for joining us today, and really hope that the session was useful and interesting. Myci, you did an amazing job of bringing CUNY's CPL data to life and helping us think about the space that we're in and the potential that we have more concretely. So so thank you so much. And I do, apologize if there are more questions. I think we both would be very happy to hear from anybody and to continue the conversation. And I will be circulating the poll to the session registration list in case we can gather any more feedback or questions to inform next stages of research. So thank you all so much for joining. And I lost the person with their hand up, but if they did want to jump in now that as people are on their way out, I'd be happy to stick around for another couple minutes to answer questions as well. And if not, have a great day and a great Halloween, everyone.
Thank you so much.